while you guys were having your little chat, there was another chat happening as well. So I think the panelists will open up with some of the sort of themes that they had noticed and wanted to share, and they'll just use your questions as inputs. So I will hand over to whoever in the panel would like to open. Who might that be?
Am I accidentally the only person that has their mic on? The default starter. Well, I guess to bring everyone into the conversation, or part of the conversation that we were having, was around the idea of transitions and time, and the roles that both play in this kind of work, and how important it is to be flexible within that space, and to be able to kind of shift and shape yourself, the work, what it's called, how you think about it, where it goes, is always quite emergent. And I think that's always been one of my big takeaways with transition design, and particularly the merger that I've been playing around with between transition design and autonomous design, because I feel like they complement one another, and particularly in a global north context, you know, autonomous design doesn't just kind of pick up and plonk down here overly comfortably. I think there's a lot of communal practices and ways of being, particularly in the global south, that we don't have in our sort of individualistic sort of Western ways of thinking and being together. So the work here kind of, there's a bit of a discomfort around just culturally taking, and trying to bring it here. So there was something for me in that, around how am I working with some of these ideas that aren't mine, that aren't from my culture, that I'm finding so incredibly valuable, because they create opportunities to bring people together in ways that allow for the relationships to extend over long periods of time. And so I guess the part of the provocation there was around that idea of time, and how slow some of this stuff is, and what you kind of give of yourself into that process.
So if I just butt in here for a second, one of the questions on the mural board was, how do we support people to conceptually time travel, walking backwards and forwards in time? Chris or Mel, did you have anything that you wanted to add to what Nikki shared?
Excuse me, just cough into a microphone. That's always good to do. Yes, it's an interesting space to navigate, because Nikki and Mel and I and Jax were talking about how some of these concepts from, as Nikki said, a sort of global north perspective, are qualified and labeled, whereas in indigenous knowledge or other forms of cultural knowledge, they are just part of cultural knowledge, and it's almost like practices and practitioners can go into spaces and talk about these names and these academic ways to do things that have actually existed within cultures and communities for hundreds of years. And just because you name it or talk about it in a certain way, does what's the relationship to the practice? When I mentioned this idea that when you talk about co-design to Māori communities, they just say, well, that's what we do, that's how we are, that's how we've done things for hundreds of years. And similarly, when you move into a future space, a lot of the canon of knowledge, even though it kind of developed in different spaces, when you think about someone like Jim Data and his work from Manoa and on Hawaii, and valuing those sort of forms of knowledge, it also comes from a very Western perspective, right? So this idea of that there is a past, a present, and a future is a very Western concept, whereas in other spaces, like in a Māori space, it's the past, present, and future are sort of intertwined like a rope, and you can't separate them. So even when we engage in futures practice, we can colonize that space just by the tools that are best practice or at the cutting edge of what we're doing. So like we talk about working in the spirit of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is in partnership with Māori and Pākehā. That's why, in terms of those transitions, we got to a place in our project where we knew that what was more valuable than, and I'd always said at the start of the project, design thinking is not right for what you want to do, and there's an Indigenous way to look at that, but we don't have the perspective at the moment, but we're going to get to that point. So when we got to that point, then it was how can we, and bearing in mind I'm working with Māori community, so I'm led by them, and then it was how can we partner with Māori designers for them to lead the co-design of an Indigenous framework that starts with an iwi, but then can be offered to any iwi for them to co-create that, and that's sort of those transition points that I think we were talking to, Nikki, of over time things evolve and change, and you need to reposition and reorient whilst keeping the spirit of what you're trying to do alive, but working with an emergent context, right? I'll hand over to Mel.
Thank you, Nikki and Chris. So much food for thought. Gosh, where to begin? This idea about the Western colonized view of time is really interesting. I mean, even the fact that most of you have probably seen that the futures cone, which is, and if you haven't, it's a fantastic tool for helping people to visualize, the fact that there's more than one future, but it is very dependent on the idea of, time being this linear thing. So, I think to be able to pull out all those other conceptions of culturally how time is, because Jim Data, famously talks about the idea that, well, the future can't be predicted because the future doesn't exist. Well, maybe it does from other cultural perspectives. I think another thing that, just circling back to the question, which is a fantastic question about how do we support people conceptually to time travel, going back and forwards in time, that is a super great question. And actually it's a really important one to us, because there's a whole lot of obviously cultural dimensions that make it difficult for people, but actually there's some pretty fundamental cognitive and hardwired into our at a sort of basic brain level. It's really hard for us to think about the future. Our reptilian brain is not equipped to do that, and thinking any more than 5 years out is really tricky. And I'll find it for you. I can't remember her name, but there's a fantastic researcher from the University of Sydney who talks a lot about this. So the fact that we're not very good at thinking about time is we're not very good at thinking, very, very far into the future, is obviously a limitation in getting people to imagine futures. So there's a whole talk in itself about how you can support people to do that, but just to acknowledge what an important question that is.
Thanks, Mel. Are you finished there?
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of minutes left. What I would like each of you to do is have a look at the board and just have another little look at what the other questions are. You don't all have to answer the same question, but if there's anything that you would like to share that sparks for you in your mind from any of the questions, we'll just do another whip around, so each of the panelists will have another opportunity to respond. So Nikki, would you like to have a look at the board and see if there's something that inspires you to share, that you feel to share from the participants' suggestions?
Sure. I'm going to pick up on one that was on the board that was also posted in here about what are we willing to give up in order for communities to flourish, because I think it's a really important piece. But I will make a comment about one of the other notes, which is around the commons. And one of the things that we've been really deliberate and intentional about is giving a voice to the commons. And so for us in the Food Futures project, that is about land and actually making explicit reference to land as a stakeholder in all of the mapping that we're doing, in all of the conversations that we're having. We're making sure that we're recognizing that the commons need a voice whenever we're talking about anything to do with a natural environment. And then in terms of this idea about what are we willing to give up, that's not one of the things I'm willing to give up. I draw a hard line around that being taken off the board or off the table. But part of the intention of our process is to design ourselves out of the process. And so effectively, we kind of go into these scenarios with the idea that we will give it all up because it was never ours to have in the first place. We're there to hold some space and to invite conversations and to help those conversations to take place. We're trying to connect. What we're not there to do is remain as the glue, because really the relationships that start to emerge and build and develop and flourish in the community become the glue. And the second a consultant or a designer or a researcher or anyone who sort of walks around and potentially wears the hat of expert goes into a community and thinks that they're the glue, there's a problem. And so the idea that we're willing to give up, I guess in some sense, an ongoing livelihood in that particular community, which is not to say that we don't get to pick it up and do it somewhere else. So we do intentionally think about that removal of ourselves. I'll pass it on to someone else.
I just want to acknowledge that it's quite late for Chris, where he is in New Zealand as well. So extra big thanks to Chris for staying online with us so late. I
have to pack to go to school camp tomorrow as well. So
extra big thanks.
No, I just say that's the next thing that I've got to do. I just want to build on that. I'm not 100% sure of the framing of the question. Well, whether there's like some theory behind it that I'm not understanding, or whether I see the question in different ways. To build on Nikki's point, I've offered to give up the project, right? I've said you need to be working with other practitioners that can help you do this in a different way, and you know, maybe I'm just not the right person for it anymore to sort of carry this on, because it's the right thing to do. I suppose that's why I struggled with the question a little bit, is that I think you should be willing to give up whatever it takes for the right outcome to happen within your knowledge of that project, right? So, and obviously there's some things that on the flip side of that, like Nikki said, that you should never give up for the integrity of the project as well. So I sort of flip it in my head in a way. But yeah, I've done that. I've given up money and status and ego and all sorts of things just for the project. But I've also given up. I've also said you need other people. You need other people that's not me within it. But there's reasons that they don't want that to happen, and it comes back to this building relationships and trust and integrity within the work that keeps you connected because that's what people value at the end of the day, that you do the work. Because everyone's got there's all these idealistic views of what projects are and what they should be, and sometimes they can be crippling, right? They can be, and it can be crippling. It can be, you can be paranoid about saying the wrong thing, mispronouncing the word, using the wrong word, whatever it is. Like it can become really crippling to the point of not wanting to engage, because there's all this stuff that sits around the context of the project. But if you do things with integrity and an open heart, and you're willing to be wrong, and you're willing to be better, and you want to be better, and you know that you can be pulled up on things sometimes, and you'll make a change, you know, that's what people, I think, what people value, that ability to act in that way, and do it with a good heart and a warmness and a generosity, that we're all going to this place together. I probably waffled a little bit then.
Thank you so much, Chris. And over to you, Mel, for your final reflections.
Final reflection. Well, thanks, Chris. That was really lovely and beautiful. And Nikki, basically, I'm so excited that you kind of saw the link that I see as well between Commons and, you know, you'll see I've just added some arrows there to make a little, you know, a loop back and forth between the Commons and earning an honourable living. I actually see them. It's late. It's a good can of worms to open, and probably not at this point. But those things are, for me, very much linked. I can see how we can use the Commons as a way, you know, and using the analogy of the flying the plane and rebuilding at the same time. You know, the Commons, I'm gradually trying to find ways, and we're all trying to find ways to do those two things at the same time. And the Commons provides a real sense of potential and hope for me in you know, livelihood, honourable livelihood. So that's it from me.
Great. Thank you, Mel, for your reflections. It's late. The can of worms, I'm sure, is a very interesting can of worms, and maybe we can have further dialogues about Commons at another one of our events. It might be something for us to think about. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming and joining us this evening. It was a pleasure. I am recording this, so I will be popping up some videos at some point soonish. As I mentioned, we have some more stuff happening in February, so please do come along to stay abreast of all the things we're doing. I encourage you to like us on Facebook and join our e-newsletter. I try to put e-newsletters out about once every month, and I often put lots of reading material in. So hopefully there's some value other than just hearing about what we do, but also hearing about what other people are sharing online. So yeah, again, thank you, Sarah, for your impeccable link support and general support for Social Design Sydney and Systems Change Salem. And we'll hopefully see you all again soon. And big ups for our speakers. So can we do a big jazz hands? Like, that was awesome. I was really excited to have you all, and it's been a really rich dialogue. And thanks for everybody as well for sharing in the chat. And yeah, it's been a really rich